And baby, I'm TFC till I die.
Hello and welcome back to Toronto Till I Die, the Toronto FC fan show. I'm Mike Newell. And one thing you can say about this version of Toronto FC is when their backs are really, and I mean really, against the wall, they seem to find a way to respond, and we will talk a lot about that on tonight's show. We will, of course, discuss TFC's 2-1 gutsy win against Austin FC on the weekend at BMO Field. As you can see, my co-host Michael Singh has returned, so we will return the three burning questions with Michael Singh. And we will also give you a little bit of playoff watch / a little bit of what to expect over the next week, because TFC will be quite busy with two matches this week against Columbus and Colorado on the road. So much to get into. Let's get into it. Bring in my co-host, as I mentioned before, Michael Singh. No Jeffrey P. Nesker tonight. Mike, it's been a while. How you doing, buddy?
I know. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's been a while, and it does feel like a lot has transpired in TFC land since we last spoke. I mean, I was looking at the calendar today, and like the amount of games that are left. I'm like, how did we get here? How did how do we find ourselves past Leagues Cup already, past the majority of the season and into this home stretch, this playoff push, as we'll call it here, and we'll get into a little bit more. It just feels like things have quickly transpired. But then you look at the team on Saturday, which we'll dive into a little bit more. But that's more so the TFC 11 at least that you remember, more or less, minus Kevin Long. So yeah, it seems like results wise, things are trending in the right direction, but we can dive into the game a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. It's been an interesting one since Leagues Cup, because you've had some really nice performances, and then you've had some absolute stinkers in terms of performance, right? So, and I was weirded out there for a second because your name was up there, but then JPN showed up, and I was like, are we gonna get like a surprise like entry or wrestling entrance with JPN? But no, it's okay.
Yeah, shout out JPM, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Dr. Hope all as well there.
Yeah.
Sending our best wishes, Jeff. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's jump into it. Austin FC on the weekend, 2-1 win. We've talked about this, Jeff and I, prior, just how important these last games, especially at home, are going to be, right? And in terms of how TFC is really going to have to find another gear if they want to sort of make this playoff push, that they're going to really have to use these home games to catapult themselves into a position. And obviously, the first one against DC United, not so great. A really flat, really a concerning performance considering how important the game was. But they really stepped it up in this game. And you have to hand it to John Herdman, to the coaching staff, and to the players. They turned up for this one. And I thought that this is probably the strongest, again, aside from like Kevin Along, this was probably the strongest 11 you possibly could get from TFC.
Yeah, for sure. Like personnel wise, you look who was available, who was on the pitch for the team, and look who wasn't available. It's more so because, as John Herman spoke to after the game, just kind of the depth of the roster right now. I mean, who is it? Brandon Cervania and Sigurd Rosted didn't even make the bench for Toronto FC. So it does go to show. I mean, those guys halfway through this year would have been key pieces, key starters for this team, given the amount of players that were away. I mean, Cervania was injured obviously for most of the season, but had he been healthy, he would have been right in there. But they can't even make the bench. So it's a deeper squad heading into this game against Austin. And yeah, overall, I actually, how do I say this? It wasn't the most convincing performance for me for Toronto FC. I mean, I looked at the team, looked at the way that they kind of performed at home against an Austin team that, quite frankly, has really struggled this year. And I expected TFC to, dictate the tempo, really take it to Austin, but they seemed like a team um, that was playing a bit on, I don't know, like, more on the back heel, and it wasn't like it was they weren't able to do so because obviously they took their chances and they were effective in their, I don't know if there's a game plan, but their, yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, execution of whatever it is that they're trying to do or whatever that is that they did and adapted to. And they took their goals really well, like I said. And then, the biggest thing for me was how they were able to, secure the 3 points at the end of the day, how they were able to see that game out. So that to me was a positive sign, positive step in the right direction. Um, but this team, for me, playing at home against Austin, they looked like a eighth, ninth place team as opposed to, maybe the top 4 side that we're seeing at home earlier in the year.
Yeah, this is definitely, they kind of are what they are, right? At this point, and even with the strongest 11. And I will agree with you that, if you look at the stats here, although they win 2-1, the XG was widely in Austin's favor.
Mhm.
If you sort of look at sort of critical chances, again, in Austin's favor. In
5
many
big
ways,
chances to
yeah,
2, I see, yeah.
exactly. In a lot of ways, the hero of this match, although we'll talk about DeAndre Kerr, and obviously, we'll talk a bit about the DPs, but Sean Johnson, by far is man of the match here. Um, Essentially, you pay goalkeepers in MLS top dollar to at times win you what, 7 to 10 points a year. In terms of just being able to sometimes snag a victory out from the jaws of defeat. And that was Saturday was one of those games where realistically Sean Johnson stops 4 most likely should be goals for Austin. And that's what you need down the stretch. I mean, again, this was the old adage of this was a game of two halves was very much the play. Whereas in the first half, I think TFC looked a little bit better. They looked like they were breaking lines and making great passes. Welcome back, Alonso Coello. That
Mhm.
made a big difference from that perspective. But they looked a little bit threatening going forward. But that said, some of the frailties that we're used to seeing with this team, bad turnovers in bad spots, giving away opportunities, 2-3-on-1 defensively, reared their ugly heads even in the first half. And it just, again, Shaw Johnson had to stand on his head a little bit to pull out those 3 points.
Yeah, Sean Johnson was massive for TFC in this game, and had he, not been there for some of the big saves that he made, and had quick Austin's maybe finishing or execution of the final third been a little bit better, this is a completely different storyline. But you got to give credit to Sean Johnson. That's why TFC signed him. That's why TFC re-signed him. That's why, in my opinion, Toronto FC have a top 5 goalie in Major League Soccer, and it's something that oftentimes we take for granted, right? Remember what was it, 2 seasons ago when you had Q and Alex Bono in goal for TFC, and the amount of goals that Toronto FC conceded where they just simply shouldn't have given up. It
Yeah.
was it was an ongoing problem for maybe 2 of those seasons, the final 2 seasons, if I remember correctly. And I remember thinking just how much of an issue it was back then and how would this be resolved? Well, enter Sean Johnson and we kinda forget about some of those really bad goals that were given up, and those are backbreakers to teams, and we don't, TFC don't give that up anymore, right? That's such a big part of Toronto FC's defensive turnaround. Their structure is knowing day in, day out, you put Sean Johnson's number on the game sheet. He's the first name probably to go on every single time. You know what you're going to get is
Mhm.
someone who not only is going to make the saves he has to make, but someone who has a chance, I think, every single time they a team comes in on goal and, whether it be off a corner or, a couple breakaways that we saw against Austin, Sean Johnson is at least going to be, within the vicinity of it. Even the goal that they scored where, any goalkeeper in the league would be beaten out,
100%.
almost
Yeah.
penalty spot. I feel like Sean Johnson still came up somewhat close. So I can't say enough positive things about having, Sean Johnson here. It's a conversation we've had many times since he joined TFC. He's been so steady, so reliable, and once again showed up in a really, really big way for TFC on Saturday night. And you said 7 to 10 points every year. I couldn't make an argument for possibly even more
Well,
for
that
Sean
should be like the
Johnson.
league average, TFC average, very different.
Yeah.
Probably spiking that average up more in terms of the league. When you look at the way the TFC comes out with their 11, right? It's the 3-4-3, whatever you want to term it in terms of a formation. One of the things is some things that jump out at you. Obviously, no Kevin Long, as we mentioned before, but no Davy Flores starting. And this is due to the return of Alonso Coello from injury. Only got about 45 minutes with TFC2 the week before, and sort of warm up, and then thrown right into the 11 in a pretty crucial game. And look, I think looked all right. I mean, for a player who hasn't played in 3.5 months, almost 4 months, since a hamstring tear. Again, I thought was a player that helped. The one thing he does really well, and I know on this show we have criticized him for bad giveaways and things like that.
Hey,
And
you have.
I have
You have.
100%. I have. But the one thing the thing I always come back with is that when he is on the ball and he does get it right, he's helping this team progress the ball. He's probably our best progressive midfielder that we have. In terms of getting the ball forward, breaking lines, finding players in dangerous spaces, the pass before the dangerous opportunity, right? To put
Mhm.
yourself in that position. And I thought, especially in the first half, he waned a little bit in the second half, I think, and that's just probably fatigue and not being match sharp. But I thought he really kind of helped stir a bit of the TFC drink going forward, along with Oso and DeAndre and the DPs.
Yeah, for sure. I think the whole spine of Toronto FC's team, Nixon Gomes also playing, the center of the back three. I thought the whole spine of TFC was excellent. And I'll even include, Lorenzo Insigne, obviously Ozo into that, DeAndre Kerr, Alonso Coelho, Matty Longstaff. I thought they all had really, really, really strong games, but circling back to Coelho, I remember you saying like before that we've criticized maybe some of the risks that Alonso Coelho has taken, and I remember before he went down, TFC fans were all over Coelho because there were some pretty bad glaring
High
mistakes, and
profile.
the
Yeah.
the one thing is when he's out, you really miss that. You really
Yeah.
miss what he brings in the midfield, and that's someone who, like you said, breaks lines. And one of the things I love to talk about is like the angles in which he's capable of playing the ball and seeing the game, where other midfielders simply can't around Major League Soccer. Like he's got that, he's got that Sergio Busquets now, right? And he's got that ability to play through the team, quite frankly, to play through him. And it's a trait that while Davy Flores has flashes of it, it's different with Alonso Coelho, and he makes a really big difference of making this team a little bit more fluid moving forward, especially when you're trying to break down a press. And I think he's so good at that. I thought it was every time he did something like that, it was kind of a breath of fresh air because we hadn't seen it in 3-4 weeks or however long he's been out, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, one of the notes I have here is the build up for the second goal is perfection. I know he's not necessarily a part of that, but him being a presence on the field helps those things kind of happen. And look, the second goal is kind of, if John Herdman, I feel like, could draw up a perfect goal in the way he'd want it to look, that's the way he'd want it to look. Lorenzo wins the ball deep. Maybe you don't necessarily want him that deep, but he wins the ball deep, gets it to Oso. Oso releases Richie Larea just at the right time. And the thing that I feel like a lot of TFC fans, have noticed and have missed is that sort of long busting kind of use that pace run from Richie Larea down the flank. It just feels like we haven't seen a lot of that this year. Now, obviously, he's been away from the team a lot via injury and with national team duty.
Yeah.
But, he continues this run. Oso finds him in space. And then it's just, a great ball across to DeAndre Kerr for the finish. And look, I think Kalen Carr on the broadcast called it sort of like a training ground exercise in terms of the way that it came about. But really, it was, it's kind of the way that John Herman would like this team to kind of be able to spring in sort of a counterattack. And just a beautiful sort of worked goal from the team.
Yeah, I thought the goal was excellent. It was a Canadian connection as well. I
Yeah.
think Ozo released Richie, and then Richie plays it to DeAndre. I thought Richie's pass was fantastic. I didn't know exactly what Richie was going to do with that. He had a lane to potentially go to goal with it. But credit Richie, gets his head up, makes an excellent ball, plays an excellent ball over to DeAndre, and DeAndre, obviously the run is there. He's in the right spot where he should be, and does his job as well. So not to um, I guess glance past that, because we definitely haven't seen that at times from Toronto FC's number nines of them being in that position, but we also
Yeah.
haven't seen that final ball be played, because had that
Exactly.
gone to a, Bernadeschi or Insigne, odds are them in that position, they're betting on themselves, and they're, you know, probably going for goal, and to their credit, at times, probably finding the back of the net. But with Richie, his decision, weak foot to play that, square that pass, I thought, uh, was a was a terrific pass and a goal I think Toronto FC also really needed, because even before then, I found Austin was starting to pick up the pressure a little bit, and for them to go up, not just one but two goals in the first half, I think was massive for that team, and overall, I thought Richie probably had his best game of the season. I mean, he's a guy who obviously has been out for a really long time due to injury, and then like you said, a little bit of national team as well. But he was up for a fight, and that's what we love about Richie. He's at his best when he is so engaged in these games, and part of the reason he was so engaged because he was tasked with going up against another feisty player in Bukhari, and
Hmm.
they went back and forth a little bit this game. And that's when Richie thrives. Is he's not backing down. He's gonna give the extra 110%. He's gonna get in your face. He's going to, be a little bit nasty, but he always for how aggressive and how extreme, I guess is the right word, that he is at times.
Extra is another word.
He never seems to cross the line. And there might have been instances in the past that we've seen that once or twice in his career where it has happened. But Richie, whether it be with Canada, whether it be TFC, when he does get into some of the extracurricular stuff, he's not getting sent off, and
That's
knock on
true.
wood. He always finds a way to edge that line and keep it within the realm of play. And he gets, picks up yellow cards early at times in games, and yet he's still able to play a Richie Reyes type of football while still within the realms of play there. So he doesn't get enough credit for that, I don't think. But yeah, overall, offensively, defensively, I thought it was Richie's best game of the season.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And one of the things that and we've talked about it on the show, but you feel like you're missing this season from Richie is that sort of drive at defenders to get into the box and drive at people and make things happen, whether that is to get that final ball across, whether it's to take a shot or to potentially draw a penalty, right? Like you see that a lot of the times he's standing a little bit outside. He's obviously trying to play with Fede. He's trying to make those connections work. But this was a game where I felt like he was using his legs. He was getting those legs stretched out, and he was going at people with the ball at his feet, and that is the best version of Richie Larea that you can get, and obviously that just makes you much more dangerous in the final third in terms
Mhm.
of playing. And look, it goes without saying too. Just again here are the notes. Just thinking about having Oso and Fede back after missing them from yellow card suspensions. Neither one gets Oso gets the goal early. And again, sort of just doing the vet move, the vet thing, following in, making the run, anticipating once he saw DeAndre take that heavy touch that a ball might come his way, and then just we've in the past given Oso some slack for shooting, not shooting, but that one just put his foot right through it, sat up beautifully for him. And I think that was big, not just for the team, but I think that was also big for him in such a massive match to get that goal early on. It really kind of set the tone for that first half.
Yeah, and what a goal it
Yeah.
was. Like, I don't know if we've seen I mean, we've seen some pretty good and important Jonathan Osorio goals over the course of his career. I don't know if we've seen a better just standalone finish from Ozo because he's listen, 65th goal, I think it was
Yeah.
for Toronto FC in all competitions. I believe took him into the top 3 of
Yeah, so he becomes only the second Toronto FC player, along with Sebastian Javinko, to have 100 goal contributions for the club,
yeah.
goals and assists. So, because he also, I think he gets the hockey assist on the second goal as well. So,
Yeah, so, I mean, listen, over the course of whatever his Toronto FC career, that's gotta be right up there with some of the best finishes, and, like, he's not known to be a guy who, can strike the ball like that or can maybe take a hit from outside the box, but to score 65 goals and be in a company with Sebastian Javinko and Josie Altidore as top 3 Toronto FC scorer of all time, I mean, we know he has the ability to get in the box. We've talked about that for years and the ability to get on, the back post and pop up at the right times. But a goal like that to enter 65, that was special. It was a broken play too, quite
yeah,
frankly. Like DeAndre Kerr should have done much better on that play. It was
yeah,
like a
his touch was
4v1,
heavy.
4v2.
Yeah,
Decision was bad, quite frankly. And Ozo picked it up in a massive way. And that's what Ozo has kind of been for this team. And one thing I'll say about Ozo, and this actually applies for Richie as well, because I remember speaking to both of them about this, but specifically Ozo was uh when it was the 2022 season, and this was when Jonathan Osorio was having his best season in Toronto C shirt,
yeah, it's
that in
probably right to say.
2018.
Yeah,
Very, very close, but the one thing that he kinda touched on and he talked about, and this was me asking him, was how much of a difference it made, going into Canada camps and playing in competitive matches. That's obviously when the, I think CONCACAF,
yeah,
what
we
is
were
it
probably
called?
in qualifying. Yeah, we're in
Yeah,
qualifying.
Olympic or the World Cup qualifying was going
Yeah,
on. Um, and Canada was playing so well. They were top of the group, top of the table, and Jonathan Osorio was an important part of that. And I remember him talking about the confidence that he gained from playing in games like that in a role like that. Well, you kind of fast forward to this last 2 windows for Canada and what transpired obviously at Copa America under Jesse Marsh, and then, even this most recent window where they again put in a really solid showing. And I feel like Jonathan Osorio is playing more confident again.
yeah,
There were times even during this season I felt like maybe it wasn't he wasn't playing with that swagger that we've seen Jonathan Osorio play with in the past, and I feel like recently he's really started to come into his own, and while he is, fairly steady, fairly reliable, there's a different level Jonathan Osorio can take it to, and I think we saw that level once again on Saturday. I mean, when TFC were racing to re-sign Jonathan Osorio, it was coming off a season where he was one of the best midfielders in Major League Soccer. He was the I think the most coveted free agent probably of that year. And if he can get back to that form, it's a really serious weapon for TFC and makes such a big difference, such a big difference for this
well,
squad.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, having somebody like Alonso Coello who can be progressive in the midfield, it makes Jonathan Osorio potentially better. Because what does Jonathan Osorio do really well more than anything? He does two things super well. I think one, he's tidy in possession in terms of his feet, in terms of being able to dribble and get around players, and not necessarily like in a flashy. He's not going to necessarily beat you like prime Neymar off the dribble or anything like that. It's more tidy feet in the sense that he can keep possession of the ball in tight spaces, be able to sort of play a 1-2 touch and get around guys and then get that ball off to the right person in the right space. And then the second thing he's really good at is coming into the box late and in reading those situations and being able to find himself at the middle of the goal at that penalty spot or just above that 6-yard box for tap ins or really, really, really kind of almost strikerish second forward type goals. So those are the two things that Jonathan Osorio is really good at. And having a progressive midfielder behind him who can kind of do some of the work that we kind of think Oso should be doing, because sometimes we think he should be playing further back and getting the ball and progressing and things like that. It allows him to be a little bit more expressive up front. It allows him to connect with Fede. It allows him to connect with Lorenzo, with Richie, with whoever the number 9 is going to be, in this case, DeAndre Kerr. And kind of be goal dangerous. And that makes I think that if you have that, it makes Toronto FC better. I think if you talk about next year, can you find someone that is going to be in the starting 11 a little bit more consistently, maybe that can kind of take up that ball progression place and push Alonso Coello for minutes, maybe. But if you have a Jonathan Osorio like that, who doesn't have to worry about some of that other shuttling kind of number 8 stuff, and he can kind of play in between that 10 and that 8 and kind of be almost like a 10 that kind of can be a second forward in a way, that's the most effective Jonathan Osorio, and I think that's the most effective TFC.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I agree with that, right? I like what you said. If you take away some of that responsibility, I love how you said that, of Ozo having to drop deep at times to help, release some of that pressure in the midfield. He could free him up to do other things. That's what Ozo's always been. He's been a Swiss Army knife. He can do it all. Like, if you wanted to play a 6, he can play a 6. If you want to play an 8, he can play an 8. If you wanted to play on the wings, he can do that. No problem. If he wanted to play as a 10, he can do that. Jonathan Osorio is great at doing a lot of different things, but when you refine his role even more, because his teammates are also capable of doing some of the things that he's good at, that's when you get the best out of Jonathan Osorio. So yeah, I agree. I think that's well put.
Yeah, and I know there's some comments about like Oso's been inconsistent this year. He's not been that great. Look, the record shows for itself. When Jonathan Osorio plays in this team generally is going to win soccer games, right? Like it's just it is what it is, right? Like, so clearly there is a need for him. Clearly he impacts the team in a way that produces better performances. Does that mean right now they're a cup winning team? No. But I think what it does is you have a player that can, put it this way, and I've said this again in the podcast, he does some of the little things that don't show up on stat sheets that aren't gonna, right? I think he's only now, I think that was maybe second or third goal this year. And he's got like 5 assists maybe. So stuff that's not necessarily, but he's doing a lot of things that are just not showing up on stat sheets, right? And that you need that player. Now, obviously, look, we expect that Jonathan, and we know that Jonathan Osorio can score double-digit goals, in a season. We've seen it twice. But I think, from those things, you need him to be also doing some of those smaller things. But if he can be freed up to be that, again, that sort of hybrid kind of second forward / midfielder who can connect in the final third, then I think you've got something there in terms of a pretty good TFC team.
Well,
A couple other. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
it's like we talked about with Richie, right? Having him in the lineup, you have a bit of aggressiveness with the team, the mental fortitude, the toughness of having Richie on your side. Just it's a team you want to go into, or it's a player you wanted to go into war with, right? Same thing with Jonathan Osorio, right? He makes his team so much tougher to play against, and I think raises the standard for everyone else and demands more, especially as he's kind of grown into this leader. And John Herman, after the game, he described him, and you're a United fan, so I'll let you speak on this too. He described him as a Roy Keane type of captain. Thoughts?
I'm not so sure about that, but I mean, look, I get where John Herdman's kind of going with this. I think he called them like a steely-eyed defender, or not defender, sorry, a captain. I kind of get it in a sense that, look, I think one thing that Jonathan Osorio has done a lot more in the last couple of years is he's taken more of a leadership role in his team, and now obviously he's the captain. is he'll hold people accountable on the pitch, right? He's holding people accountable on the pitch. I saw on a Saturday night, he was holding the coaching staff accountable, right? Like, I remember at one point he was yelling something to Jason DeVos on the sideline, right? In terms of how they may be setting up for a corner to defend a corner, right? So, I think that from that perspective, that's there. And you could see a little bit of that in Jonathan Osorio in the way that, in his press moments with the press, that he can, obviously he's going to be honest and very insightful, but at the same time, he can also have a little bit of that edge to him. And that's, look, I think that's the relatively good thing for this team. You do need somebody that has a little bit of that edge. I think the one thing that we have to, we've mentioned it before, but, that line of, and you talked about it with Richie, and sometimes Oso gets over that line in the sense that he's getting too many cards and that it leads to suspensions and things like that. Like, maybe learning to walk that line a little bit more in terms of referee interactions might be a thing that he needs to learn. But I can kind of see it. But it's Roy Keane. That's next level. That's something a little different.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do believe one of the stories that hasn't been covered enough this year has been the growth of Jonathan Osorio and how he has stepped into the captaincy, right?
Yeah.
Because we were pretty unanimous with who we thought should get the captaincy, and hindsight, I still think TFC made the correct decision by appointing Jonathan Osorio as captain. There's a lot of voices in that room, a lot of voices that have accomplished more than Jonathan Osorio has in his career. I mean, John Herman said after the game, he's shocked how Ozo hasn't managed to play at the top levels of football in the world, whether that be the Premier League or whatever it may be. He doesn't necessarily have that type of experience, but what he knows better than anyone else at this club is Toronto FC, is the city of Toronto, is what it means to represent Toronto FC. So, and he had massive shoes to fill as well, right? He took the armband from a guy who, as we've talked about at length on the show, embodied all of that for Toronto FC and then some. And to have Jonathan Osorio step into this role as the captain is, I think he's done a tremendous job in a really, in a way, a quiet way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like he's that quiet anymore, especially on the pitch.
No, for sure, and I think from that perspective, he knows this is sort of the crunch time now. This is the time where he's got to kind of step up and be accounted for now, especially with only 5 games left in the regular season. A couple more points here before we move on from Saturday night. DeAndre Kerr, is he finding some form at the right time? I felt like the last couple of appearances, I should say. Again, still a lot to work on. Still, in terms of being a little cleaner on the ball, decision making, as you mentioned before. But I also find that he is starting to find himself in the right spaces more often than not, and that's a little bit of a change from maybe even earlier this year in terms of the way that he's playing. Again, you talk about the second goal. I felt that at times, even in build-up plays, he was finding himself in the right spaces, being able to pick up the ball, and hold up and find the right people and then make moves. I think I'm a big believer in him. Everybody on this show knows that I'm a big believer in DeAndre Kerr. But I wonder if this is a good, maybe not problem, but a good thing for TFC, that at least one of their number 9s is maybe finding a little bit of form down the stretch here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think John Herman said he's been battling injury all year. One of the things that I said earlier this year, I think he's learning how to kind of evolve his game from being a guy who really his entire career, probably up to this point, probably relied on a lot of pace, a lot of beating players 1v1, to now a striker that does a lot of that, does a lot of the hold up play, does a lot of the things that a target number 9 has to do, as well as someone who's capable of getting in behind. So it is an adaptation for sure at this part of his career. But yeah, you mentioned finding form at the right time. It's the perfect time for DeAndre Kerr to find form. And he was a guy when coming into the start of the season, he's a guy that you probably had penciled into that starting number 9 job. Let's not forget that. And it wasn't until Prince Owosu went on this, little bit of a hot run to claim that starting number 9 job. But now with DeAndre Kerr healthy, with him finding the back of the net in 2 consecutive games, with him playing with a little bit more confidence, let's say, he has all the runway here to go on and secure that starting number 9 position for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then lastly,
Wait, before we go do that, wanna hear a
oh sorry,
crazy stat?
go ahead.
21 years old, DeAndre Kerr scored his 16th goal for TFC.
That is
You know
that is crazy. Yeah, that is
where
crazy.
that puts him in Toronto City's all-time leading scorers?
Probably he's in the top 10. No,
He just entered the top 10
yeah,
all-time of Toronto City leading scorers with his, 16th goal at 21 years of age, a
that's
homegrown
pretty
product,
good.
so
Homegrown guy. Yeah.
that's kinda special.
It is special. And look, he's got 8 goals this year. I know 4 of them are against Saint Laurent. All right. Like, we can only talk about, like, okay, he scored 4 against a semi pro team, whatever. Still needs to put the ball in the back of the net. It's still pretty impressive from that perspective, considering, again, injuries and sort of form dips throughout the year,
Mhm.
right, from him. So that's pretty impressive. And then lastly, I'm going to say it again, really impressed with Henry Wingo. Like, it's a shame that he had to come off in just before halftime this game, and I wonder, hopefully it's not too serious in terms of an injury. But I am impressed with him in the sense that he's kind of what you talked about early in the season when we were sort of like Shane O'Neill, Shane Maldini, like, what is going on here? Why is this guy carrying the ball so well? He can definitely do that in spades. And that is a really impressive thing. And then, of course, defensively, yes, he made the mistake against DC United. We talked about it on the show. We roasted him. It's now in the past. But I think more often than not, he's going to be somebody that TFC really rely on him being that sort of outlet to sort of bring the ball up and sort of set the attack, at least connecting the defense to the midfield.
Yeah, definitely, and he does have that Ozo and Richie kinda attribute to him where this guy's not backing down from anything,
Yeah.
any sort of challenge. I love that about him. He's kind of as advertised, right? He's not the flashiest player. He's not a guy who is going to be a 9 out of 10, you know, again, I think he's a very solid 7 out of 10 player who probably is less prone to those mistakes at DC United than we saw. So, um, yeah, he's like you said, he's a guy who can go forward, very solid defensively, fills in that kind of need that TFC were looking for. Is he a starter for TFC when they're at full strength at their best?
I would
He's
say
close.
yes. I would say
He's
yes.
close. He's
I
close.
mean, you would probably put Kevin Long as sort of your lead center back, and then from
Mm.
there, you're looking at him and maybe Nixon Gomes, or between him and Petretta as the third center back.
Yeah, that's it, right? It's gonna be John Herman having to make some difficult decisions, but that's kind of the position that you want to be in. It probably also depends on the side that you're going up against too. But um, yeah, he has the potential to be a very, very solid piece for this team. And like what was that? Probably his fourth, fifth game
Yeah,
for TFC. So
yeah,
still a
still
lot of
really early on.
yeah, still a lot of growing opportunity for him as well. He's not necessarily the oldest player as well. So, yeah, I really like the signing. Good profile, good age. Seems steady.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just hope that him coming off before halftime is not super serious or super long term. Though he jogged off, so I don't know if it was like super serious. But obviously, I think with 3 games in a week, they wanted to be a little precautious there. Okay, so that wraps up the game sort of recap there against Austin. Let's go into your 3 burning questions. You're back on the show. We haven't done this in a while. But would
Totally.
love to go into this because there's some things we got to talk about it with this team heading into the stretch run and a cup final next week as well.
Yeah, cup final. Before we do that, just quickly, last thing I wanted to say on the game
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just the way that TFC finished that game out. I was really impressed. Had some CONCACAF to them, the way that they
Yeah.
were able to take some of the fizz out of that game towards the end. Yeah, sure, they conceded the 1 goal, which was brilliantly taken. TFC let their guard down for a little bit, but you got to give credit where credit's due. But I mean, they conceded relatively early. I think they conceded in the 81st
Yeah,
minute, if I'm not mistaken,
probably.
or 75th minute, even earlier. So they had a lot of work to do to see out that result. And man, we talk about Richie Larea and what he did for the team. The amount of fouls and the amount of big battles and the decision that Richie Larea was able to win and draw. He was enormous for the team down the stretch, and there was a good period of the game, good chunk of the game, maybe 5 minutes, where you expect TFC to kind of absorb all the pressure, park the bus, sit back, but because they were able to draw fouls, because they were able to keep the ball, they really again took some of that fizz out of the game and were able to see out the result because of that. So, we talked about this team's game management at times throughout the season. I thought that was an excellent example of what you need to do when you're winning, when you're up. And it's yeah, as G Money talks there exactly, 84th to 89th minute. They did a phenomenal job at slowing the game down while maintaining possession. TFC two has also been doing well with this game management. Yeah, game management is huge in this. And it was Greg Vanny, or actually it was Bob Bradley who used to talk about this a lot, was how important it is to draw fouls when you're up the pitch. And we saw TFC do it a couple of times against Austin because it allows you not just to, take a breather, but it allows you to shift your entire team up the pitch together, right? Instead of
Yeah.
having it have large gaps between your defense and your midfield, or have players caught up field like a Richie Larea because they're making a big run, it allows you to kind of hit that reset button. And, sure, it takes a minute off the clock, but it also allows you to be in position to absorb that next blow if that comes. So I thought they did a really terrific job of that. But anyways,
Yeah.
let's get into some of the burning questions again.
Yeah.
As usual, these are bigger picture questions, where this team stands essentially. So we mentioned DeAndre Kerr. So in this case, as the number 9, who starts as the number 9 down the stretch for this team? Prince Owosu or DeAndre? Who would you go with, Mike?
I'm a DeAndre stan. People know that. I think you ride the hot hand, and I think you go with DeAndre. I think also, I will say this, I think DeAndre gives you a little bit more in terms of versatility on the field. Being able to potentially swap positions, play wide while somebody else kind of takes up that quote unquote false 9 position or takes his position at times during build up. Prince Owosu is going to be target forward is kind of an old cliched word, but is going to be a little bit more of a target forward in that way. I go with DeAndre. I'm a big believer in him. And I think he can also do a few other things for you on the pitch where he might drop deep and allow again Oso to make a run, or Lorenzo to make a run. And I think he's getting better at being able to recognize those opportunities and recognize those spaces and where to step and when to be in the right spot to be kind of that number 9, like you said, on that second goal. So I would go with DeAndre, but I also know you're a big Prince Owosu believer as well. So state your case. No, I'm kidding.
No. It's quite honestly what the answer's been the entire season. You start the hot hand, and if DeAndre goes game, 2 games without being impactful, you have Prince Owusu there who will get every ample opportunity to state his own case. So for me, that position is not cemented in any way, shape, or form. DeAndre Kerr still needs to make his claim to it for this last final games and final 5 games, and hopefully for the first playoff game this year. But I wouldn't be surprised if we come, when was it, end of October, beginning of November, whenever that first playoff game is, and we see Prince Owusu starting as Toronto FC's number 9, because both players have shown flashes. I would say at their peak, if they're both on their game, I'm taking Prince Owosu, but Prince Owosu hasn't been on his game recently, right? He's been really unreliable as a finisher for TFC, even though he can add different things. And the other thing I like about Prince, and John Emer's talked about that, this is how he needs kind of finishers in his team, not necessarily scorers, but people who can bring in off the bench and make an impact and can see a game out. And I think Prince Owusu does such a good job of that. One of the things I just talked about, how TFC's game management was so good. Prince Owusu was a large part of that, with the amount of times that he got fed the ball and he was able to hold up play and really absorb a lot of blows. He also, I think, believe drew a foul or two
Mhm.
in the final third. So I think he has the potential to see a game out more so than maybe a 21-year-old DeAndre at this time. So that actually might bode in a worse way for Prince. But either way, I think both are going to be used in really big ways for TFC down the stretch.
All right, perfect.
All right, number two, uh, with Alonso coming back and assuming everyone's healthy for Toronto FC, and assuming Jonathan Osorio starting as that right inverted forward, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
who is Toronto FC's best midfield pair duo? So I think the candidates are Davy Flores, Alonso Coello, Matty Longstaff,
Mhm.
and wild cards, obviously Kosi Thompson and Brandon Cervania
Yeah.
for that center midfield position. So,
Yeah.
who would you say?
This is a tough one because I think most of us, for the most of the season, have seen sort of Longstaff Flores for large parts of the season. That said, I would actually go probably Davy and Alonso, which we probably saw more often at the beginning of the season. And the reason I'll go there, although I have, and I said it earlier, as much as I have slammed Cuejo in the early part of the season because of those mistakes and those sort of taking those chances and getting burned, you are right in a sense that, yeah, Turts, I agree with you. I think, and Smith, I agree with you because I think you need the one thing that we didn't really have when it was Longstaff and Davy, or Davy and let's say Kosi, is dynamicism. I can't even say it now in the midfield, in a sense that look, great shuttlers of the ball. Both Longstaff and Davy are going to go into a challenge. They're going to try to win the ball. They're going to they're going to do all those things you need of that position for sure. But you need someone who is going to break some lines, really break some lines with some passing, and that's what Alonso Coello brings to this team more than any other of those players. And I think when you think about Davy and you think about Longstaff and you think about Kosi and Brandon Cervania, I don't know if we'll see Brandon that much down the stretch, but he is available. But I think those guys aren't quite the same player, but they can kind of do a lot of the same things at times at varying levels. No one really can do kind of what Alonso does from that perspective, and I think that's your probably best midfield pairing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends on the matchup. So if TFC expect to be the ball dominating team, uh, Alonso and Matty Longstaff would start for me.
Okay.
If TFC are expecting maybe a tougher opposition and aren't going to be able to dictate the play through the middle of the park as much as they would like, maybe a Davy Matty Longstaff uh, makes more sense there. You go with
Hmm.
more of a veteran pair that can cover more ground, that can do some of the more, dirty defensive work. Yeah, I would say it's matchup based. I don't I they all you're right. They all have so many different or such different profiles, and it's
Hmm.
such a positive thing to have if you're John Herdman, and even Kosi has developed into more of a, Davy Flores type of six there as an option. As you mentioned, Cervania is kind of like a like for like for Matty Longstaff. Um, so it's good depth to have there. I just think it's so matchup dependent, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the upcoming games, but I do think if you're home and you're trying to be a bit more on the front foot, I think
Yeah, that
yeah,
makes a big
that
difference.
Davy Alonso Cuello midfield is kind of the way you may want to go.
All right, so last one I have, John Herman this week came out and said that he hopes that the team will make a few, more signings before the deadline. Uh, what I will say to everyone is don't write it off just yet. Is there is always time after the deadline has passed to announce new signings, and for whatever reason, stuff like this could get held up, but as long as it was in before, I believe, was it
13th.
Saturday's?
Yeah, the
Friday's
13th.
deadline?
I think it was Friday, but
Friday's
Friday, yes.
deadline, then, you're in the clear to still do it. Like today, Carlos Vela was officially announced by LAFC, right? That's 2 days after the deadline. So I still think there is definitely possibility for TFC to add in a face or two. But that said, let's just say, we don't know anything about who it is that's coming in. What position would you like TFC to make if there was one acquisition that they could make, one signing?
Are you saying like going with the heart, or are we going with the head and kind of like, okay, what's really realistically going to make sense down the stretch?
Like, what do you think TFC, like, what's gonna make sense down the stretch? And let's say it can't be a number 9 because I think that's the default answer.
Yeah,
We all
well,
know
yeah, that's the thing. Well,
we would like to
that
improve
was the
number
thing.
9. If
Yeah,
it's not number 9, what position is it?
yeah, I think, if you're going with the not obvious answer, I think you probably want to maybe shore up the midfield. I think you want to bring in another sort of midfielder that is more like a 10, that can kind of pick the ball up and sort of connect and make plays and things like that. That would be my wish list. I think you kind of addressed the center back thing by getting Wingo. That would have been my other answer, but I think Wingo sort of gives you a decent stable of center backs that you can work with. And then you have to include like Sigurd Rosted in there as well. And Ami Mabika is sort of that last center back on the depth chart. So I
Mhm.
think you got enough center backs at this point. Now it's kind of looking at that sort of midfield and finding that dynamic player that can really help and connect, Oso and the DPs and your striker, to sort of help offensively. So that's where I would probably look.
Mhm.
But I know a lot of people are going to say striker in the comments. So
Well, yeah. Striker is obviously everyone's first choice, I think, for this team, and I think it's not just this year, it's been several years of of wanting it and desiring a striker, so that definitely adds it to us. Um, for me, I agree. I think that's definitely a need that this team needs to address. I think they need some like Lorenzo Insigne, Federico Bernardeschi insurance. If one of those guys goes down, is there a player that can step in and do some of the things that they do in the final third? Right? There's not obviously, not to the level that they do, but think of like a Derek Etienne Jr. Can they find another Derek Etienne Jr. or even a slightly better Derek Etienne Jr. just as insurance on this roster for them to, be able to have insurance of someone who can create in the final third, essentially. Um, the other second position I'd say, and I'm kind of I know I said one signing, but if I were to toss up, is like that central center back position.
hmm.
Kevin Long goes down. Dixon Gomez did fine on over the weekend, but if it's against a team like, let's just say Columbus, and you don't have Kevin Long as your central center back, is Sigurd Rosted stepping into that role enough to, you know, limit Cucho and
I would
what
say
his
Kevin Long
potential
maybe
is?
not enough to limit Cucho at this
Yeah,
point. You know
fair,
what I mean?
fair. There's not many things that can limit Cucho at this point,
Yeah.
but are you comfortable with Sigurd Rosted as that center of the back three, or can you make another Kevin Long-esque type signing to supplement that position?
Hmm.
So I think that's kind of where I'd go. Um, but thinking about it now versus where this team was even at the start of the year, it feels like a lot of the holes for this team have been filled in a really quiet way, I guess, is the best way to frame it. There's not much, when we're looking at TFC's depth chart in the offseason and even start of this season, it was okay. They need right back, center back, left back, center mid,
Yeah.
striker. They need all of the above. But now with the emergences of some players, obviously adding a guy like Tyree Spicer gives them some flexibility on the wing as well. Matty Longstaff's ability to jump around different positions. The amount of defenders that they've added to this roster, Henry Wingo being one of them. It's not they don't have many holes anymore. Now it's about taking this team to the next level and optimizing their spend. So it's a we talk about where they are in this build. I think they've done well in year one of the John Herman rebuild, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about spend, and the question here is just like, how much can the team really spend right now in terms of cap space and things like that? Like, I know they have some space, right? And they have roster space for sure.
They acquired it.
Yeah, they acquired the roster space. And now with the JMR trade, right? Like, you get a certain amount of GAM now that they could use. So there's space to sign somebody.
And signings this time of the year only count against half the cap, but you never know like what kind of mechanisms behind the MLS roster rules TFC have activated in terms of spending some of that money on, maybe buying down cap hits, a whole lot of MLS, lingo. So you never really know how exactly the money is spent, but they should have some money available, especially if John Herman is teasing signings here. I'll just say, like last thought, it's super weird that a team can make a signing with 5 games left.
It is so it's very MLS. That is very, very MLS. Even the CPL guys, like CPL teams, are signing guys. They've got like 5 games left. I'm like, how are you allowed to bolster your roster like this? I don't get it.
Yeah.
But
Even
very
though Carlos
MLS.
Vela added to LAFC.
It's like, oh, really? This team that's already really good and already has Denny Bwanga is also getting the other guy who is as good as Denny Bwanga. Okay. G-Money is wondering if you're hinting at anything. No, not hinting at anything.
I am not, guys.
But I wonder, maybe just really quickly before we sort of wrap up the show and go through just the playoff implications and stuff. You mentioned, some of these times these signings have been done and are wrapped up, but there's something holding it up. What are those things? And I think a lot of fans we hear that and they're like, what do you mean it's being so what are the things that would be holding up TFC from announcing a player that they have come to terms with before the deadline or maybe on that deadline day?
Yeah, I mean, well, one funny one that I've heard is a player announcement video was delayed. So therefore the announcement of a signing got delayed. It could come down to like honestly a multitude of different factors that I don't even know like the full extent to. At times it's you assume that the medical's done, but then there's other things that need to be done to have a player situated in the vicinity. So whether that be helping move a family or family factors, whatever that may be. Paperwork should be filed, so you imagine that contracts were signed, however that may be. But it could just be that the fact that the player hasn't, arrived yet in Toronto for various factors. So that's probably the thing I'd chalk it up to, if anything were to come.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so before we wrap up here, we're kind of going to do this every week until they're either officially in or officially out, but setting up the table, the run-in, and the next couple of matches for Toronto FC. So setting up the table right now, Toronto FC sit in 8th on 36 points. They are 5 up on Atlanta in 10th. They are 3 up on DC United. DC United no longer have a game in hand. So we are now caught up on games with DC United, but the teams below in Atlanta, Philly, and Montreal all have a game in hand. Maybe even as just as important, we're only now 2 points behind Charlotte in 7th, who are in a bit of a free fall right now in terms of their play. Charlotte haven't won a game since, I think, July. So they're right now sitting in 7th on 38 points. They do have a game in hand on TFC, but it shows you how big Saturday's win was, because if you don't win that, and results don't go your way, then you're in a very precarious spot where literally one team gets one good result and you're out of it. Whereas now TFC can kind of a little bit control their destiny. They still need a little bit of help in some aspects, but right now that's kind of where they sit at the moment, with 5 regular season games left. This week, 2 games. Wednesday night at BMO Field against Columbus Crew. I mean, what's to say? Columbus is third in the East. The only reason they're probably not second is Cincinnati just matches them step for step, and Inter Miami have Lionel Messi, right? So they're third. We have not beaten Columbus since 2021, home or away. And I think we only have 1 draw in that time. So the record is not great since Wilfred Nancy has taken over at Columbus. And you get the feeling that, I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe I won't editorialize. Maybe, Mike, you give me a thought here. But Wednesday night, Columbus come in. They're a playoff team. They've already clinched their spot, so they're good. TFC come in, still need result, but also have a long travel to Colorado right after the game, probably. What are you seeing there on Wednesday night? Do you see a chance for TFC to maybe pull out a little bit of a surprise result?
I would say there's always a chance with this team this year. That's the one thing that I think TFC have taken strides on is that um, there haven't been too many games this year where they've just been completely blown out. I think their worst loss this year was the one to Vancouver away from home,
Yeah,
if I'm
well,
not
the
mistaken.
other one was the away game against Columbus, where it was 4-0, and they were out of it like real
Yeah,
quick.
yeah, that's a good call. Columbus is, in my opinion, probably the best team in Major League Soccer.
I would call them the best team in Major League Soccer. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean they won the Leagues Cup this year, right?
they did. Yeah.
They won the Champions Cup or Campions Cup, whatever you want to call it.
The Campeones, yeah, whatever. I forgot that even exists anymore. Yes, they did win
Yeah.
it.
And they obviously won the cup last year, MLS Cup last year. Um, yeah, I know people are saying Miami in the chat. I know it's
I like
I
if these two
still
teams meet each other in the playoffs, I'm putting my money at Columbus.
it's tough. I mean, I know Miami have Messi and they have the Messi factor, and Miami were still able to keep up results without Messi. But when these two teams met in Leagues Cup, it was Columbus that I believe emerged victorious in it. So
It was.
um 1A, 1B, let's call it. Let's settle there. Um, Lionel Messi, yeah, definitely can make the difference and maybe push Miami over the edge because he's obviously unreal, the best player in the league, obviously. But Cucho Hernandez is also performing at an unbelievable rate right now for Columbus, and they play a much tougher style of game than I think Miami plays. And I don't want to take anything away from Miami. I just feel like Columbus is very, very, very well rounded. Anyways, that said, I think with this TFC team, I look at the first game what in the year, and that's when they were away to FC Cincinnati. At that time, probably most people wrote them off for that game, but they found a way to not just you know get a result, but I think they played better than Cincinnati that game as
They
well.
got it out of draw. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they probably you can argue they deserve more, and that's away from home. So with TFC at home, they have a little bit of momentum here. Obviously, as you mentioned, TFC are likely going to be the more desperate team. I mean, this is it. This is kind of gut check time for this club, and with everything kind of laid out there as we just did, um, you have to imagine the TFC is going to try and throw everything at this game. And John Herman was able to, rest a few guys or withdraw a few guys. As you mentioned, the squad is a little bit deeper. A midweek game, you never know. So I wouldn't rule TFC out of it, but obviously they're going to be, probably significant underdogs in this one, heading into this one. And I will say, like the rest of their schedule is, man, it's
Tough.
not easy
Not
at
easy.
all. There's, like you said, 5 games left. You're then away to Colorado on, I believe, Saturday night. Um, that's a Colorado Rapids team coached by Chris Armas, who's in third place in a very tough Western Conference right now. So that's away from home where TFC have struggled this year, obviously. Every team in Major League Soccer, for the most part, struggles away from home. Colorado's really, really good at home, too. So that's going to be a tough one. And then you're away to Chicago, which is going to be the easiest game that you have remaining on the schedule, in my opinion. Because then you return home, you face a Red Bull team who, while they haven't been good at, away from home this year, whenever TFC face the Red Bulls, it's so, so, so tough for Toronto.
Yeah.
And then you're, of course, home for the finale against Inter Miami. And we just talked about how good Inter Miami can be. So every point is going to matter. Every game is going to matter. So it doesn't matter who you play. If you're Toronto FC, you have to go out there and you have to go for the 3 points because you're in such a dogfight right now. It's not just a dogfight to clear that eighth spot and get into seventh and get the avoid the play-in game in the playoffs. It's a battle for the teams that are in 10th, 11th because it is relatively tight. So that's why Saturday's victory against Austin was massive, massive for this team, and they need at least another 2 of those, I'd say, if they want to get into that 8th, 9th spot, even more if they want to get out of it.
Yeah, I think a couple of weeks on the show we said 44, 45 points are kind of the you're safe. In terms of they're at 36 now, so you're looking at trying to get 3 more wins out of these 5. I wonder, I mean, they're not going to do it, obviously, but I also wonder, like, do you kind of look at the Columbus one and be like, if we can get something out of it, great. But if it's looking hairy at a certain point, save the legs for Colorado because you're going to be in altitude, you're going to be away from home, and they haven't been in Colorado since 2021, and this is the Chris Armas revenge game, So, I wonder. You go for it obviously on Wednesday night, but if Columbus is playing Columbus Crew football and they're starting to make it look like it's not good, you just pull guys out and just say, you know what, we'll live to fight for Saturday night.
Probably, quite honestly, because as you mentioned, if things aren't going the way that you want them to go, then you gotta focus on the next one because every 3 points is gonna be so important for this team. Here's a random question for you though. How many players are on Toronto FC this year that were on that 2021 team? How do you think?
Okay, also, Richie.
Yeah.
For Columbus, sorry, for DC, or sorry, Colorado.
For TFC, that were on that 20, coached by Chris Armas.
Oh, coached by Chris Armas. So Oso, Richie, DeAndre. That would have been would that have been his first year?
DeAndre was Bob Bradley.
Bob Bradley, yeah, Bob Bradley brought him up. No, Kosi got brought up by Bob. I'm trying to think. Okay, so Richie, Oso. Is there anybody? Would there have been anybody else left? I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it.
I think that's it.
I'm taking a double look, but I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Because like I was thinking like, maybe it was like somebody like maybe that would have been Kosi's first year, but no.
All those kids were promoted by.
Yeah, exactly. And even like, well, if Jaquil was still here, it would have been Jaquil too. But but that's not the case. So yeah, those are the only 2.
That's insane. That's 3 years ago.
I know.
The amount of roster turnover. And this is a team that had a lot of consistency through, say 2015, 2016 to 2021.
That's crazy. Here's a random question before we wrap up the show. Here we go. Here's the last question for you.
Yeah.
We never really talked about it because we really went in on Chris Armas at the time. And rightfully so in some cases, but in a lot of ways, a lot of this was not his fault. It was just sort of the way that the situation that he inherited. Do you think Chris Armas really got a fair deal in Toronto?
Oh, no. No, heck no. He definitely did not get a fair deal. Did he do himself any favors? No. I don't think he recognized the situation and for what it was, and I don't think all of his decisions were the best decisions for the club. But no, I mean, look, we talked about this. The type of coach that Chris Armas is, the type of team that style of football that he likes to play. He inherited a Greg Vanny roster, which is polar opposite to the style of football that he likes to play. Well, then at the same time, though, Chris Armas, I remember his introductory press conference where he talks about Michael Bradley scoring more goals for Toronto FC and playing higher up the field. Like, you just read that completely wrong,
Yeah.
right? So it was a combination of the two. It was okay, he obviously didn't have a roster and he got fired after 9 games, I believe it was, uh, in the season. And then the other part of it is he didn't do himself any favors with some of his decision making, some of his asks of the team. So he wasn't able to adapt as a coach, and TFC didn't give him the tools that he needed as a coach to succeed. So overall, wrong hire, but happy for Chris Armas. What he's been able to go on and do from Toronto FC is good for
It's
his career.
incredible. And sometimes you're like, how does this guy get fired by TFC? And then he's like, a couple months later, he's on the sidelines for Man United. It speaks a lot about Man United also, but still.
But hey, he got the Colorado Rapids of all teams who
Yeah.
people thought, I mean, there's a team that had the third overall pick this year in the MLS Super Draft, third worst record in MLS last season. He's got them to third in the Western Conference right now, which, I mean, speaks volumes to
and playing his
him.
football. He got the guys he needed to play his football.
Oh yeah. So, all the credit to him. He's done well there with Colorado, and wish him all the best except for Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday night, just turn to a pumpkin and go back to 2021, Chris Armas, and we'll be all good. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for tuning in to another Toronto Till I Die episode. Follow us on all the socials. You can search us at Toronto Till I Die. If you're on Insta, give us a follow at TTID Show. And if you haven't already, and you're listening to this on the podcast version, please go ahead, subscribe, and also leave us a comment. We're also trying to get those YouTube followers up. We're close to a nice little milestone for us. So if you could go ahead, give us the thumbs up, give us a like, and hit that notification bell so you know when we're going to go live with the show. So for Michael Singh, I'm Mike Newell. We will see you next week. Cheers, everybody. Peace.
Peace.